What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be kind of going over CP point distributions for tanks as you're leveling up throughout the leveling process. So this is going to be updated for the Dragon Bones DLC, so the new CP cap is now 720 and not 690 like it was in Clockwork City. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started talking about our CPs. So I kind of went ahead and made basically a couple of different what I like to call tiers. So I have a CP set up for 160 CP, so you just managed to get to the gear cap. Then the next step we're going to be going over is going to be 300 CP. So that's basically the point where you stop gaining max resources from additional CPs. The next CP point is going to be 450, and that's a pretty good stage where you can, or a lot of people might say, okay, you can start bringing your tank to vet trials if that's kind of what your ultimate goal is going to be. So around 450. Then we're going to do 600. 600 CP is around where some people say, okay, you have enough CPs, you have enough mitigation CPs to start doing more difficult content like VMAW and VHOF with the hard mode crack trials. Tanks, generally speaking, your experience and how well you can learn and how quickly you can pick up mechanics, that's going to be generally more important to how successful you are in vet trials. So for example, my raid guild in Mayflower, our main tank actually beat Vet Maw on a 300 CP or around 310-ish CP tank. So these, guidelines aren't necessarily hard rules, but they're generally regarded as pretty good, pretty safe cutoffs for vet trials content. And then finally, of course, we're going to have the CP cap, so 720 CPs. So let's go ahead and get started with CP 160. So I currently have all my CPs distributed, so I will have to clear all of my CPs like so. My dogs are freaking out about somebody in the hallway, so just have to deal with that. So we'll start off with our green CPs. So at 160 CPs, you have what is that? You have 54 into, I want to say you have 54 into your reds and 53 into greens and blues. Hold on one second. Let me just double check this real quick. But I'm pretty sure it's okay, so yes, you will have 54 points into the warrior, and 53 into the thief, and 53 into the maid. So we have 53 points right now spread across our green CPs here. So the two, or I guess the most important, the two most important nodes here on your green CPs are going to be Arcanist, which increases your magicka recovery. That's going to be very important as a tank because a lot of your buffs, regardless of what class you are, a lot of your buffs are going to be using magicka skills. So, things like Igneous Shields if you're a DK, all of your buffs as a warden, those are all magicka based skills. So you're going to use magicka. So you're going to want to have higher magicka regen, so that way you're able to, give yourself more magicka every 2 seconds in combat, so you can use those buffs more often. And then the other node that you're going to want to put points into right off the bat is going to be Shadow Ward, reduces the cost of blocks. So if you guys read the patch notes for Dragon Bones, you guys will know that they increased the cost of block, or rather they decreased it if you weren't using block cost reduction jewelry glyphs, but if you aren't using block cost reduction jewelry glyphs, it was actually a buff. Generally speaking, you will still be running block cost reduction glyphs on your jewelry pieces, so it is generally going to be a nerf for most PvE tank setups. You can play around a little bit with the with your jewelry enchants, so you don't necessarily have to use block cost reduction glyphs, but generally speaking, it is for most tanks going to be a nerf. So you will going to want to put a little bit more points into Shadow Ward right off the bat, so that way you get that block cost reduction. So for right now, we're going to put 53 points here. So start off with 27 here. Then we're going to have 26 into Shadow Ward here. So the kind of whole purpose behind hitting these specific numbers is we want to hit the jump points here. So if you take a look here, it's for 27 points to Arcanist, we have a magicka regen increase of 7.07%. However, the way that the game kind of codes these percentages is that it actually truncates these numbers. So anything past a decimal point is actually completely ignored, and it doesn't actually even round up. So something like 7.01 is going to be the exact same, give you the exact same regen as 7.99. So when we are talking about these CP points, then when we talk about jump points, what we're talking about is the amount of points you have to put into a node in order to hit the next whole number. So for instance, if we're going to be using Arcanus as an example, a jump point is 27 because that jumps from 6.85 to 7.07. And you know, the jump point for 6% would be 23. So you can see here from 22 we have 5.94, and 23 jumps up to 6.17. So that's where we get the first whole number jumps. Those are what are called the jump points. So the CP nodes, they have differing max values. So for example, Arcanus, Tenacity, Mooncap, those all have 15% as their max. So if I put 100 points in Arcanus right now, you can see that it'll top out at 15%. And now, due to the changes in Morrowind, how CP points have kind of been distributed, you get a lot more out of the first half, 50 points into the nodes as you would for the second half. So that's something you also want to keep in mind there. When you take a look at builds, you don't necessarily want to put too many points into CPs. You can if you'd like to. There's nothing wrong with doing so, but it's usually going to be a better idea to shift your points somewhere else in order to get the most out of your CP points. So this is for your green CPs. For your blue CPs, again, we have 53 points here. So the two most important CPs are going to be Blessed and Elfborn. Blessed does increases your healing done, and Elfborn increases the damage and healing of your critical strikes with magic abilities. Precise Strikes is also a decent one that you're going to want to invest in, but that's kind of later on down the line. And then everything else is pretty much secondary here. So the blue CPs are very focused on DPSing, so you're not necessarily going to be putting a lot of points into these other nodes here. So now, why do you want to do Blessed? Because I've had a lot of questions about people asking me, like, why are we putting points into Blessed when it says healing done? So when it says healing done, it isn't just talking about heals you're doing to other people, it's also talking about heals that you do to yourself. So for example, if you're using Vigor and it heals, let's say, 5,000 health over the 5-second duration, and you have 10% into Bless, so you have, increase your healing done by 10%, it'll actually heal for 5,500 over 5 seconds rather than the 5,000, even though it is a self-heal. So that's why we want to put points into Bless. That just improves our self-heals, which are going to be pretty important for survivability as a tank. So we're going to want to hit the jump point, so we're going to hit the 7% jump point here in Blessed. Oops, a little bit too much here. Then we're going to hit the 11% jump point here in Elfborn with 26 points. And this is our 53 points right here. Now for our red CPs, we have 54 points. So there are a couple of ways you can start off with your red CPs, and it kind of depends on what kind of approach you want to take. While you're leveling up, I recommend taking a much more balanced approach towards allocating your CPs. So there's really 4 primary CP point distributions here, nodes I should say. You have Hardy and Elemental Defender. These are going to be 2 very important nodes. There's currently a bug, I'm not sure if it's been fixed, but we're assuming that it hasn't, where you want to invest into Hardy and Elemental Defender first before you invest into the next 2 nodes, which are going to be Thick-Skinned and Ironclad. Apparently there's some weird coding going on in the game where if you put Ironclad and then Thick-Skinned first and then go into Hardy and Elemental Defender, you'll actually get less damage reduction overall. So we're going to be focusing first on Hardy and Elemental Defender, and then we'll be putting a couple of points into Ironclad and Thick-Skinned here. So again, we have 54 points. So Hardy will reduce damage from physical, poison, and disease damage. Elemental Defender from Flame, Frost, Shock, Magic damage. Thick-Skinned is damage over time, and Ironclad is direct damage. So you can think of damage in ESO comprising of 4 different types. So you have basically Hardy damage, so physical damage, physical, poison, disease damage that are direct damage, and then obviously damage over time, so that's number 2. And the third type of damage that you're going to face off is going to be magical damage, so Flame, Frost, Shock, Magic from Elemental Defender, and just like with Hardy, you have direct and damage over time components. Now, generally speaking, the most dangerous damage for DPS, for a healer, for a tank is going to generally be magical direct damage. So Elemental Defender and Ironclad are generally going to be a lot more important than Thick-Skinned and Hardy. Now obviously this is going to vary depending on the content that you're running. Generally speaking, for example, a lot of dungeons, for instance, have a fairly balanced mix of direct damage or not direct, physical damage and magical damage. But if you want to get into endgame content like normal trials or vet trials, Um, each trial has its kind of own separate difference when it comes to where damage is coming from. So Helra Citadel, for example, it has a lot more physical damage coming in compared to magical damage. But if you, let's say, go into Ethereum Archive, you're taking more magical damage as opposed to physical damage. So a lot of endgame players will actually start shifting points around on their CPs depending on the content that they're going to be running. So if you're going for an Ethereum Archive hard mode run, for instance, I might decide to take a couple of points out of Hardy and put them into Elemental Defender or Ironclad, so because I'm not going to be taking as much physical damage in that trial. So that's just something that you're going to want to take into consideration as you level and as you set your eyes on the specific content that you're going to try to run. But for right now, at CP 160, we're going to be going for a balanced approach here. And since we're trying to split our points across 4 different nodes here, it's going to be a little bit difficult to hit very high jump points. But that's just kind of the nature of the game. You don't really have that many CPs right now to split among all these different nodes. So again, we have put 11, 11, 11. Actually, we're going to put a couple more points here, actually. Go 19, 19, 5 here, and that leaves us to put 11 into Ironclad. So we hit the 5% jump point in Ironclad. We're sitting at the 2% jump point for Thick-Skinned. Damage over time abilities generally aren't quite as dangerous in PvE content. Most of them are either going to be very, very small ticks, or they're going to be very, very large ticks. And the large tick ones are, generally speaking, going to come from the very endgame content. So for example, Asylum hard mode, or Asylum Sanctorium in general, actually. Maw, for example, is another one where you might want to put a little bit more points into Thick-Skinned. But generally speaking, for dungeons and the Craglorn trials, Thick-Skinned's not going to be quite as important because the dots there aren't going to be quite as strong. And another thing you also want to remember is if you're a tank, you have a lot more resistances than DPS and healers, so you're not necessarily going to be taking as much damage per tick compared to your fellow DPS. So Thick-Skinned's not quite as important as the node as compared to the other 3. So this is your 54 points if you are CP 160. And now we're going to be moving on to CP 300. So at this point you have pretty much maxed out your resource pools. You can't get any more resources from leveling up anymore. Any additional resources you're going to get is going to be coming from food buffs. So you have 300 points, which means you have 100 points across each of the 3 different trees. And so this is going to be pretty straightforward here. So you're basically going to put 50 into Arcanist, and then 50 into Shadow Ward here. So you're not quite hitting the jump points here, and that's just going to come naturally because, jump points are at these very different levels. So the jump point for Arcanist for 11% is actually 49. So you can even go something like this if you want to hit the jump point. The next 90% jump point for Shadow Ward, you can go 51 and 49, and that's just going to be a nature of leveling up while you're while you're below the CP cap. You're just gaining CPs slowly, and you're accumulating them, 1 point at a time. And jump points can be anywhere from like 2 to up to 25 points between each next whole number. So you just want to try to get up to the next closest CP point whole number that you can here. So for our CP300, I recommend going with 49 into Arcanist, and then 51 into Shadow Ward. And at this point here, you're pretty much almost completely done with Shadow Ward. Arcanist, we still have quite a ways to go. We want to hit 75 or 64 with Arcanist, and then we're going to start putting points into Tenacity here in order to get more stamina back when we do our heavy attacks. And then from Tenacity, we'll be moving on to other nodes. For our blue CPs, again, pretty straightforward here. Blessed is also going to be sitting there. And Elfborn is going to be sitting at 51. So we're hitting both jump points here, and this is how we're going to spend our 100 points here. Now 100 points into our red CPs. This is going to be a little bit more difficult, and you probably won't hit the jump points. I don't believe you're going to be hitting the jump points here, so I'm just going to put them in very quickly. I believe you want to hit 10% on each of these. No, I wanted to hit 9%. So that's 37. 37, 79, 79 plus 11 is 90, so that leaves us with 10 additional points here. Gotta hit the 8% jump point here. And then we're not going to quite hit the jump point for Thick-Skinned, but that's alright. Like I said, we're leveling, and so as you get more CPs, you can put them in and start hitting those jump points here. So this is kind of where we're sitting at right now. Um, so Hardy and Immortal Defender, because those are 15% at max, you're going to start going through numbers a lot more slowly compared to Ironclad, which tops out at 25%. So we're going to be trying to shoot for 56 in both Hardy and Immortal Defender for a more balanced approach. You know, once you get 56 there, you can start focusing more on Ironclad and Thick Skin there. So that was CP points if you're at CP 300. Now let's talk about CP 450. So now you have an additional 50 points across each of the different nodes here. So for Shadow Ward, we're actually going to add up 10 additional ones. We're going to hit 61. That gives us 21%. That's the 21% jump point here. And we're going to hit 64 here. So this is what we're sitting at right now, and that leaves us with 25 points, which you're going to put into Tenacity. So I don't believe, yeah, you don't hit the jump point for Tenacity here. You're sitting pretty much smack dab in the middle between 6 and 7%. But again, you're currently leveling, so that's just kind of the nature of the game. Now you can actually take the 11 points out and put them into Arcanist if you'd like, so you hit 14% magical regen. That's kind of up to you, so do remember that, you know, since CPs are very front-loaded, the first 50 points you put into Arcanist, or any node really, it's going to give you much more return compared to the last 50 points. So, you know, if you want to put those extra 11 points in for the extra 1% regen, then, you know, go ahead and do that. But remember that you're giving up 11 points into Arcanist for 1% additional regen. So if you're sitting at about 1200 regen, you know, 1% of that is only going to be 12. So, you know, you kind of have to make the call there whether you want that, you know, that little bit more, you want to push out just a little bit more out of your CP points, or if you want to shift them somewhere else and get a little bit more return somewhere else instead. So this is what I would recommend. So again, you're not quite hitting that jump point, but that's fine because you're still leveling. Now for blue CPs, this is going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to hit 75, and then 75 here. So again, you're going to be sitting in the middle of the 23 and 24% jump points for Elfborn, and that's just going to come naturally from your leveling when you hit up to 24. Not much to discuss on the blue CPs, because again, a lot of them are focused around DPS, so as a tank, you're not really going to be concerned too much about them. Now for our red CPs, this is going to be a little bit more challenging. So we're actually going to push up to 56 here. Gonna hit 28 in Ironclad. We're gonna do 10 into Thick-Skinned here. So again, you're not quite hitting the jump point for Thick-Skinned, but you know, you're still leveling, so as soon as you get that additional warrior point, you can put it into Thick-Skinned and hit that 5% jump point. And, you know, at this point here, we have 56 in Hardy and Elemental Defenders. Now we can start focusing in on Ironclad and Thick-Skinned instead. Now, not finally, second to last is going to be 600 CP. So that's 200 CPs across the different nodes here. So we're actually going to be leaving our cannons at 64. I personally am not of the opinion that the 11 points to get that extra 1% regen is really going to be worth it compared to putting those points elsewhere. But, you know, people have different opinions, and, you know, for tanking especially, you know, it's more about how well can you know the fight, how well can you sustain. So if you feel like you need an extra 1% regen, then by all means go ahead and put those 11 points there. So for Tenacity, we're going to be hitting 11% jump point at 49, and we're actually going to start putting points into Tumbling here. So 11 there, and 11 here, and actually, you can put 13 actually, is what I have. So 13 into Tumbling and 13 into Warlord, and that gives us our 200 points here. So Tenacity, we hit the 11% jump point here, and then for Tumbling and Warlord, we're hitting the 6% jump point. So we want to kind of reduce the amount of stamina cost from roll dodging and breaking free, because we want to use that for blocking instead. Stamina is a very precious resource for tanks, so that's why we're starting to invest a little bit into those nodes there. Now for our blue CPs here, again, because none of the other points really matter all too much, 100 to 100. So that's pretty much if you're going pure tank. You'll notice that when I stream on my tank, sometimes you guys will notice that I actually have different CP setups on my blue CPs, and that's because I also double that as a stam DK. But if you're just going for pure tank, this is probably the best thing to go, because again, these blue CP nodes are all focused around providing more DPS, and as a tank, you know, DPS isn't really your job. Now for our red CPs, we're going to be sticking with 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender here, and now we're going to start focusing on Ironclad and Thick Skin. So we're going to be putting 31 here, and then we're going to put the remaining 29 points into here. So we are kind of sitting between the 20 and 21 jump points levels here. Again, that's just because we're still leveling. We still have CP points. You can see we still have 40 CP points to put around. So that's kind of just the nature of leveling while you're CP. So we can see here we're putting a lot more emphasis on Ironclad compared to Thick Skin. Again, because that direct damage is going to be much more dangerous compared to the damage over time component. Because remember, damage over time ticks generally are going to be small. Direct damage is going to be pretty much everything in one hit. So you're going to want to reduce that 20k hit compared to the 20k dot that lasts over 10 seconds, just because you're able to heal through a dot. You're not necessarily going to be able to heal through an attack that takes out a huge chunk of your health all at once. And finally, if you're at CP cap, you're sitting at CP 720, which gives us 240 points. So we're going to push Tenacity up to 64 here. Keep 61 to Shadow Ward here. Hit 26 there, and we're not quite hitting 26 here in Warlord, and that's just because of the way we have our CP distributed. So you know, we don't want to really move too many points out of Shadow Ward because we want that 21% cost reduction in our block cost. And then we want to hit 26 into Tumbling here, and then 25 into Warlord here. That's kind of up to you. Again, you'll find that I have different CP point distributions on my tank. And you can play around with this however you'd like. So like I said, you can actually even drop Tenacity a little bit more if you want. You can actually drop it down to something like 56 if you'd like, and then push this up to 28 and this up to 31 if you'd like, if you want to make it a little bit more clean so you hit all the jump points. It's kind of up to you. You can play around with the CPS however you'd like. So for example, if you feel like you're losing out a little bit on stamina regen, then you can put a couple more points in Tenacity to get a little bit more stamina back on your heavy attacks. But you know, just play around a little bit, see what works best for you. I recommend going at least with this much, so you have the 120 points into the lever, which gives you the wind running perk here. It does increase your movement speed, which does include while you're blocking, and that 2% movement speed might not seem like a lot, but when you're blocking you have very limited movement speed, and sometimes you're going to be thankful for to have that little bit additional speed there on some content. Now for our blue CPs, we pretty much maxed out Blessed and Elfborn, which means the only other remaining node here is going to be Precise Strikes. So you just put the rest of your points into Precise Strikes, and you happen to hit the jump point here to us, the 16% jump point here. And this will help your Vigor heals. So if you decide to use Vigor, you'll get more heals when you crit heal with Vigor. Vigor generally, because it uses stamina, you're not going to be using it all too much as a tank. You will be using it fairly often, but not all that much, so that's why we have points into Precise Strikes. And finally, our red CPs. So we're actually going to push Thick Skinned up to 44. We're going to push Ironclad up to 66. And then that leaves us with enough points to actually hit 13 on Hardy and Elemental Defender here. It leaves us 2 points left over, which you can kind of put, you know, in Spell Shield and Heavy Armor Focus if you'd like, or you can put them both into Spell Shield if you want. It's kind of up to you. If you're going with this route, you will have 2 points left over here. If you decide to jump down to the 21% jump point here with Ironclad, you'll have 7 points left over, which you can actually push up to 51, which is the 90% jump point for Thick Skin. So if you want to take out a couple of points into Ironclad and put them in a Thick Skin, you can do that, and you can hit those 2 jump points there. So that's kind of the way I would like to set up my CPs as a tank, you know, as you're starting to level. And of course, like I said, there's going to be a little bit of variation from here to there. So if you guys take a look at my tank build, you notice that, you know, my CPs, my red and my green CPs aren't exactly following this exactly one-to-one. That's just because, you know, I redistribute fairly often depending on the content that I'm running and how I'm feeling about a certain build and stuff. But this is probably the best, you know, kind of one-size-fits-most approach when it comes to tank CPs. So hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.